everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica and I'm with Confessions of a Homeschooler, and today I'm going to show you how to make this super cute drawstring bag. This is a super easy, beginner-friendly project. It only takes about an hour to make this bag in total, and it would be a great gift idea for you for this holiday season. And then I actually like to use mine to keep my knitting projects in, but you could certainly put anything you want in these. They're nice and soft and squishy, and they're super cute. So if you're interested in seeing how to make this bag, let's get started. All right, so let's talk about all the supplies you're gonna need to make this bag. It's super easy. All you're gonna need are some basic sewing supplies. So I have my self-healing mat, a rotary trimmer, some pins. I don't always pin, but you might. You'll also need a clear acrylic ruler. These are the Creative Grids ones, and I'll try and link all of the ones I'm using below, but of course you can always use whatever you have. I'm going to use 505 basting spray. If you are using batting like I'm going to, you'll want to either do that or have some safety pins to pin baste your quilt. You can also use, instead of batting, you can use fusible fleece, in which case you won't need this 505 at all. I like to use my leftover batting from when I make quilts, but it's totally up to you. You're also going to need some of this cording, and you can get anything you want. You can also use ribbon or whatever, and then you'll need some kind of a safety pin just to be able to pull that through at the end. And then you're going to need some fun fabric. So I am using the Cookie Exchange by Moda. This is kind of a fun Christmas line, and I'm going to use one of these little mini charm packs. I will not be using the entire one. You can actually get a couple bags out of one of these. You can also just use some scraps. You'll also need a larger piece of fabric for your lining, and then a contrasting fabric for the top and bottom of your bag and the strap. So I'll have listings for the sizes that we're going to cut everything to in the description box below, and also in the PDF with the pattern. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, I've got all my fabric pieces cut, and so this is going to be the casing for my cording. This will be the top of the bag, this will be the cute patchwork center, and then this will be the bottom, and then this is the handle. So we're going to set the handles, the top, and the bottom aside for right now, and our fun center, and we're just going to deal with our casings just because these are super easy. Now I cut my casings at 2.5 inches, but you're going to want to, if you use something different than the cording that I'm using, you're just going to want to make sure that you can fit 2 in there with it folded in half, plus about 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this will be kind of close for me, but you just want to measure. If you're using a thicker ribbon or maybe a skinnier cording, you might actually want to decrease this just slightly. But you can just do that on your own. So I'm going to take both of these pieces, and all we need to do to prepare these is fold them in at both ends 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and then sew down that edge. And I'm going to do that on both sides, and really all we're doing here is just getting rid of the raw edges, because we are going to fold these in half and then attach them to our bag, and so we just don't want any raw edges on the outside. So you can either finger press these or hit them with the iron really quick, but I'm going to just take these over to my sewing machine really quickly and sew down both sides of these, and then we'll be right back. All right, so here we are, and this is what the edge looks like. I just folded it over about 1/4 inch, folded it over again, so there's not a raw edge right here. And really all we're doing is just making sure we don't have raw edge right there. So I did that to both sides. And so here are my 2 strips. And now we're going to just go ahead and set those aside. So I like to just kind of get those out of the way so they're ready to go. All right, our next thing we're going to do is set out the middle portion of our bag. So here's the bottom, and then here's our 2 top pieces. And I kind of just like to lay it out just so that I can kind of see what's going on. And we're going to make a row of two rows of these charms going all the way across, and these are 2.5 inch squares. And again, this was, the one I'm using is Cookie Exchange by Sweetwater. Depending on when you're watching this, this line may or may not be available to you. But I will say that Sweetwater's Christmas fabric is super duper cute. And they've got all kinds of, I'm just getting rid of some of these white ones on the top just because I have kind of this cream colored, and I don't want to, not sure if I want to use those or not. We'll see. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and lay these out on here, and just kind of, I just kind of spread them out. Now you're going to make 2 panels of this, so you can make them identically the same. You can do, you know, something different. It's totally up to you. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do after we set our casings aside is we're going to make our patch units, and this is kind of our middle section of our bag. So we're going to make 2 of these units, and you're going to make them 2 squares high by 6 squares wide, and we're just going to sew these all together just like this. You can lay them out however you want. You can use scraps. Like I said, I used a mini charm, and when I go to sew these together, just so I don't get them out of order, I do what's called webbing. I think that's what it's called. But I'm basically just going to take this row right here and lay it on top of the first row right sides together, and I'm going to do the same thing to that one. And then I'm just going to go and sew down both of these at 1/4 of an inch, and everything in this video is 1/4 of an inch unless I otherwise say it. And then once those are sewed together, I'll bring it back over here, and then I'll add this row, sew that at 1/4 of an inch, and then just continue adding. And if you don't cut the threads in between here, when you bring them back, you can add the each of these vertical rows at the same time, and they'll just all stay in a nice order. Since I've got 2 patches, I'm actually going to do them at the same time just to kind of save me a little bit of time. So I'm going to take this over and I'm going to run 1/4 of an inch down all of these 4 sides, and then I'll bring it back over here, and then we'll add these 4 and those 4 and so on until we've got our patchwork done. Alright, so this is all sewn together and I haven't cut it. They're still attached, and that just kind of helps keep them in order. And I did forget to mention, but if you have directional, like this has text on it, just make sure you have it going the right way. So the next thing I'm going to do is pick up all of these pieces, bring them over and add them, and just to make sure that they stay in the right order. I know that I just you can put a pin in it or just make a note of which one's your top piece, but I know I have this colorful print. And so I'm just going to grab the pieces in order, like so, for all of my stacks. That way I can just bring all of this over to my machine at once and add them all quickly. Alright, so now I've got my 4 piles. I'm going to add this pile first, then I'll add this pile, and that pile. Alright, so here are my finished ones, and I haven't ironed them or cut them or anything, so both rows are together. And all I'm going to do is just carefully cut the first panel away from the second one, and then I'm going to take them to my ironing board, and I'm going to iron them with the seams going in opposite directions so that they will nest. So that means the seams on, like for example, this panel will all go that way. The ones on this panel will all go the opposite direction, and I'll do that for this one as well. And then that way when you sew them together, they will nest really well and you'll have nice, perfect squares. Alright, so now that we've got our panels done and I just press them, it doesn't really matter which way you press them, I just picked one side. This is kind of how the bag top outside assembly is going to go. So I have a top piece here, and I have my other top piece here, and then I have my bottom piece here, and then I've got both of my panels here. And then since I have text, I'm just making sure that this is going to be the top, and then we'll be folding this in half, so this will be the top. So I just made sure mine was going the right way, but it's totally up to you. And so all we're going to do is basically sew all of these together just like they're shown on this. I'm just going to put them right sides together, although this kind of solid doesn't really have a right side. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam there, and then we'll press that open. Then I'll sew these two together, that, and then I'll meet you back here. so here's our finished outside piece, and I just grabbed a piece of scrap batting, but again, you can use fusible fleece. If you do that, just follow the pressing directions on your fusible fleecing that you're going to use. And if you do that, then you won't need to do this next step. You can kind of skip over it. And I'm also going to choose to quilt this. If you do fusible fleecing, you don't have to quilt it either because it's adhered to your project. The batting that I'm using needs to be adhered via quilting just to kind of keep it from slipping around inside. So I'm going to go ahead and use this 505 basting spray. You can also pin spray this project. If you're going to do a basting spray inside, just make sure you have some windows open. And I just spread my outside of my bag onto a piece of batting that's just slightly larger than it. And then I'm going to just go ahead and kind of fold it back. And I'm going to spray. Just make sure I get enough on there. It doesn't have to be too thick. And then we'll just carefully press it down. And then I'm going to grab the other side and do the same thing. And you can kind of feel where the tackiness stops. All right, and we're just going, and now I don't know if you can see this here, but I can see a tiny piece of red thread. I'm going to grab that so that doesn't get caught underneath here since I've got this cream colored lining. So just something to be considerate about. Now, at this point, you can do a couple of things. Since I've got this lighter backing, I might actually hand stitch, do like a running stitch down here with a color. You could also machine stitch it, you know, whatever you like. I'm probably also going to run some straight stitches, just mimicking probably 1/4 of an inch on either side of all of these little patchwork seams, just to give it a little bit more definition. So I'll definitely run a stripe on both sides of this and this section, and then I may actually just leave the other sections blank, but it's totally up to you. You can quilt this however you want, or like I said, if you're using the fusible fleece, you can skip the quilting part altogether and you don't have to do any of that. But I'm just going to do that just for decorative purposes, and I like the way that it looks. So I'm done quilting, and I just did some quilting echoing the patchwork squares here, and then I did a little bit of hand quilting on either side of this patchwork section. And if you're curious, I used this DMC embroidery thread in number 503, and I held it 4 strings thick. So that kind of gives me this little hand stitch section here. And as you can see, it's not perfect, but that's okay. That's why I kind of wanted to do that on this bag. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is just trim our bag, and if it got off at all while you were quilting, that's totally fine. Just kind of straighten it out, trim it up, just make sure you have straight edges. All right, so the last piece we need to prepare before we assemble our bag is our little strap on this side. And so I'm just going to take my piece here, and I just press it in about 1/4 of an inch along both of the long edges. You don't have to worry about the short ones because they will be hidden in the seam. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And then the next thing I do is fold it in half again and just kind of match up those edges and press it again. Alright, so hopefully you can see here, I basically pressed in each of the edges 1/4 of an inch and then just folded it in half. And then I'm going to just take this to my sewing machine, and I'm probably going to run a stitch down this side and that and the opposite side just to kind of make it, just give it a more finished look. Alright, so now that I've got this all trimmed up, I'm actually going to take this over to my sewing machine. We're going to fold it in half, like so. And then we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch down this side, and then you've got this, you know, whole piece on the bottom here. And then I just like to make sure that my patchwork sections kind of line up. So I'll probably pop a pin right there and right there, just to make sure that those line up so that when my bag is together, it doesn't look like they're wonky. Okay, so we have our bag folded in half here, and we're going to run 1/4 inch stitch down both sides. But before we do that, we want to make sure we add in our handle. So we just finished creating our handle, and I'm just going to fold it in half, and these are the raw edges. And you can put it on either side. I'm just going to pick one side, and I'm just going to place it like this so that the raw edges are along the raw edges of the bag, and the handle portion is towards the inside of the bag. And I'm just going to secure that with like a little clip or a pin so that when I go over to sew it, it doesn't move around. And I'll usually also run a couple of extra stitches over this section as well, just to help secure the handle. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've taken my outer bag and taken it over to the sewing machine, and we sewed up the edges. So now we've got this kind of opening here, so, and then the bottom is again still solid, so we're just going to set that aside. And I just did 1/4 inch like I mentioned before on both sides, and then we're going to do the same thing to the lining fabric. So you're just going to take your 2 pieces of lining, place them right sides together, and just be careful on your measurements that you're sewing the correct ones together. And if you need to, you can set your bag on there, and these measurements that you're leaving open at the top should be the same. If I were to put this on here like this, you'll notice that I've got about 1/2 inch extra down here. So the bag isn't quite an exact square. So just make sure you're sewing your lining one correctly. So we want the 12.5, at least on my bag, shorter side edge to stay open. All right. So this will be the top. So I'm going to leave that open, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down both sides and then in towards the center. And then right here, I'm going to leave about 4 or so inches open to turn our bag. So again, 1/4 inch down both sides into about right here, and then leave about 4 inches open to turn your bag and leave the top open. So I'm going to do that really quickly. All right, so here's my finished lining piece, and I've got my top open and then both my sides, and then I've got my opening down here so that we can turn our bag. All right, so now the next thing we're going to do, and this is totally optional, but we are going to square the bottom of this bag, just put a little boxy corner on it. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's totally up to you. It's super easy though, and I think it gives a little bit more of a finished look. So I'm going to take my lining or my top, it doesn't matter, we're going to do the same thing to both of them, and I'm just going to stick my hand in here down to one of these corners, and I'm just going to pinch it together to form like a triangle, and then hopefully the rest of the bag should naturally do the same thing on the other side. So essentially you've got now your bag like this, and this seam and this seam should basically be lined up. They don't have to be completely perfect, but you know, you want it to be somewhat decent. All right, and then you're going to take a ruler, and you can make this you know, as large of a boxy bottom or as small as you'd like. I tend to stick to about 1.5 inches. I find that gives me you know, a good bottom. And so I'm just going to take my ruler here, and I've got my 1.5 inch marker, and I'm going to place it on one of the corner tips, and I'll do a close-up so you can kind of see, but I basically line up this diagonal line along the fabric edge, and then this line along the seam for the most part, and then I just go ahead and make a line. And then I am going to stick a pin in here just to kind of hold that in place. Now I'm going to fold that down, and I've got my other one, and I'm going to do the same thing, and I'll show you a close-up of this one. Okay, so here we are on the other one. I've got my horizontal or diagonal line on my ruler matched up with one of my edges there, and then this is about halfway, and then I'm going to go ahead and just mark a line. Okay, and we're going to repeat this process with the lining as well. So whatever measurement you chose for your boxy bottom on your lining, make sure you do whatever you chose for your outside, make sure you do for your lining. And then we're going to take these over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew right on this mark, and then we'll cut it off at about 1/2 inch or so away from that mark. Okay, now I'm going to do my lining as well, and I just kind of lined up these seams right down here, and then just stuck my fingers in there again and pulled out the corners. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same mark on this one as I did on the other one, so 1.5 inches. And again, like I said, I actually do pin these just because they can kind of tend to shift between here and the sewing machine. So here's my other one, and they don't have to be absolutely perfect. And here's my other one. All right, so let's take these over to the machine, sew along the line, and we'll create our boxy bottom. Okay, now if you aren't sure if you like, you know, the size that you chose, now would be a good time to flip your bag inside out and just check it out. I know that I like this size, so I'm gonna go ahead and just confidently cut off those corners. And I usually leave about a 1/2 inch, but I mean, it's gonna be hidden, so it doesn't really matter. And then we're gonna do the same thing to our lining. Okay. All right, so now we've got all of our pieces kind of ready to go. So here's the outside of our bag, the lining, and our 2 little casings. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the outside of the bag and we're gonna go ahead and flip it right side out. We're gonna leave the lining inside out, okay? And at this point, you can go ahead and just push out those corners. If you need to get like a little stylus or anything, you could do it at that point as well. And then I usually kind of run my finger along this seam as well, just to kind of straighten it out. And so we should have our handle sticking out, so we're good there. So here's our outside and here's our inside, and then here's our little casings. And all I did, we already finished the edges of these, so all I did was fold them in half and I gave them a quick press. And we're gonna want to center those, one on either side. And I just kind of eyeball it. You can of course measure it if you like, it's totally up to you. And I'm gonna grab some of these Wonder Clips. You can use pins as well if you'd like, but I'm just gonna kind of clip it on there to hold it in place. Doesn't need a whole lot. Okay, and then we're gonna flip the bag over. And I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. And again, I'm kind of eyeballing it. Since they're on matching sides here, kind of make sure they look about the same. Okay, so there's that. And then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take this entire outside of our bag and we're gonna put it inside of the lining. And this part can just be a little finicky, so just work with it. Obviously you want the side seams to kind of line up. So I usually have my lining like that, and then I just carefully get my bag inside the lining. Okay, now as you can see, it's a little bit messy here. So my tip for this, I get the handle out of the way, is I just take these edge seams here and kind of line those up first. Here, let's do this one because it's on top for me. So see those 2 seams. So here's the seam of the lining and here's the seam of the bag. And I'll just kind of line those up. And we'll put a clip there. Okay, then we're gonna take the other one and do the same thing. And once I kind of have the 2 sides marked, then I can sit here and fiddle with just straightening out the rest of the bag. And since I already have these clips on it here, I'll just reuse those. Just make sure that you don't accidentally let go of your casing there for your drawstring, and you'll be good to go. So just make sure everything's nice and lined up. The edges are all lined up. You should have all raw edges together here. Okay, all right, so now we've got our bag. It should be looking like this, and we're gonna take it over the sewing machine, and I'm just going to run, you can do a 1/2 inch, but I really just go ahead and stick with a 1/4 inch on this, but all the way around. Make sure that if you do a 1/2 inch or anything higher, you gave yourself enough seam allowance in your casing so that your drawstring will still fit back through it. And then I will meet you back here. So we're just gonna run a stitch all the way around the outside of the bag. Okay, so here we are. We've run a stitch all the way around to seal that up, and now we're going to go ahead and turn our bag through the hole that we left into our lining. And so just be careful, casual, you know, try not to tear it. Although if you do tear it, you can just kind of sew it back together, so it's not like the end of the world. Just going to carefully coax out the bag. Okay, so our bag should basically be looking like this. We've got the lining, we've got our little pieces for our drawstring, we've got our handle, sorry, the outside, I don't know why I called it the lining, and then we've got our inside of our bag. So what I do at this point is I will stick my hand in and just make sure that the corners of the bag are popped out well. Okay, and then we're going to take the lining over. And we're gonna go ahead and close up this hole, and you can do this by hand, or you can kind of just finger press 1/4 of an inch in, and the seams will kind of automatically go in just because you've already sewed them at 1/4 of an inch. And so I usually just kind of finger press them and then just run a stitch right along about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge there, just to close up that opening. All right, so we're back over at our cutting mat, and we have closed up our hole here, and I always like to just kind of double check to make sure that I didn't miss it since I'm sewing so close to the edge. Next step is to just push the lining inside the bag, and I kind of just, you can use these little pieces too to help it straighten it out, and you can also hit this with an iron at this point as well, just to you know, just to kind of flatten it out a little bit better. And then the last step for this bag, and then we'll just insert our cording and we'll be done, is to run a stitch around the top, and I just do about 1/4 of an inch stitch or whatever. If you wanted, you could mimic this hand stitching if you chose to do that. And so I'm going to do that really quick, and then we will run the cord through here and we'll be done with our bag. Okay, so we are done with our bag. It looks great, and now it's time to put in the cording so that we have our drawstring portion of our bag. So I have just attached a pin to the end of my rope here, and essentially what you're going to do is you're going to run one rope with the ends opening on this side, so I'm going to run it through here and through the other side like so, and then we're going to take the other rope and run it the opposite way so that the ends open on this side. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll show you a little bit. It helps if you have a safety pin, obviously, to kind of get this going. It can be kind of a tedious process though, so I won't bore you with me doing it the whole video here, but just to kind of show you what it's gonna look like. And then all we have to do is tie some knots and we're done. All right, so just be careful when you're doing this first section that you don't pull your loose end through. All right, so we've got it through the front side. Now we're gonna just run it through the back. And then we're gonna do the exact same thing with the other piece, only going in the opposite direction. And this is relatively easy. If you've left yourself enough room, the first one will be a lot easier than the second cord. So just be patient with it. Okay. All right, so there's our first cording, and we're just gonna leave that alone for a second, and then we're gonna put in our second one, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay. Okay, so we're all done. Now we've got both of our ends here, and as you can see, one has the loop on this end and the opening on this end, and the other one is exactly opposite. And so all we're gonna do is just, and if you need to give yourself a little extra space, go for it. We're gonna just take those two loose ends and tie them together in a knot, and then you can kind of trim off the ends. I kind of like the fraying of this cording, but if you don't like it, you could always use paracord, and then just, if you heat up the end with a lighter, it kind of, I don't know, hardens the ends. Okay. So then you're going to do the same thing on this side as well. My son does it all the time when he makes paracord bracelets, and you just have to, it melts the ends together so they aren't all frayy like this. But I kind of like the look of this. I think it's kind of fun and rustic. But here's our bag, and then if you just pull on the edges, boom, you've got a drawstring bag, and you can open it up, and you can use this for any knitting projects or anything like that that you have going on. All right, everyone, so that's how to make a super easy drawstring bag. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you make these bags, please make sure to tag me on social media. I'll put all of my information below. I would love to see what you make. So thank you so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you next time.